In this video, we're going to take a deep dive into Keygroup XL, which came out with the MPC3 official launch. In front of me is MPC3 software with a brand new project. It's got 3.4.1 firmware loaded on there. I also have a Voltage Lab 2 from Pittsburgh Modular off to my side, and this is just going to be providing some sound source sampling material to build a keygroup with, okay? So first thing that we need to do is send some MIDI over to the Voltage Lab. So we'll do new track, and I'll say new MIDI track. Now in here, I'm just gonna say the output is going to go to the MIDI port because I have it plugged in via MIDI going into the Voltage Lab so it can receive key information like this. Now we're not hearing anything yet because we need to monitor the source, which is coming out right here of the Voltage Lab into input 1 or input left of the key 37. And by the way, all this stuff works for any of the MPCs that are modern. So if you got an MPC 1, 1 Plus, Live, Live 2, X, XSE, all that stuff, it should work basically the same way with maybe a little bit of differences with how the keys are laid out or the buttons are laid out for your MPC. So in order to hear our analog synthesizer, we have a couple options. We could go to the audio track right here, hit monitor, and then select the input to be input 1. And then if we go back to the MIDI track, we hear what's coming out of there. There is another way of doing it though, which for sampling, I actually prefer this method. So if we just go into the sampler, which I double click sample edit right there, there is input monitoring right here, and it defaults to input 1, 2. So let's change that to input 1. And now, same thing, right? What's nice about this is you also get a tuner. So I can tune the pitch out of here to be exactly what I want. So we're gonna take this C note value, which is C1, and we're gonna sample it into the machine and then work with it from there. Let's adjust the sound a little bit. This sounds really nice. It's doing some wave folding right there. We're just going to capture that sweep into our sampler. So I'm going to hit arm, and then when I start playing, it should work. Cool. I'm going to hit stop. Now we have our sample. Let's name it something like synth oscillator, like that. And I'm going to hit keep right here. Now we have some options when it comes to the Keygroup XL, because basically what we're doing right now is preparing a sound source to use with the Keygroup XL. And also all your previous instruments on MPC2 will work with the Keygroup XL because you have the option of clicking off legacy mode and then getting all these features. We have our instrument right here with some fluctuations. We're actually going to treat this as like a single cycle oscillator. It's not exactly going to be single cycle, but we're going to treat it as if we're going to loop a section that's very short to create our own oscillator inside the Keygroup. So first off, we need to zoom in and have a look at our waveform here. So we're gonna grab a section of these spikes right here and loop them, essentially. So let's go to the end value here. I'm gonna shrink this up all the way to the beginning. And then let's find a nice selection. So I think for the start, I think we'll start at the bottom of this little trough right there, like so. And then we'll go over to the end, and we will end it basically at the bottom of that. So this is like 2 cycles essentially. And then if we test it with this, there's our oscillator. Since this is built into the actual sample synth oscillator, I can just go into main and then say new track, and I want to make a keygroup, okay? Brand new keygroup. So if I go edit, this automatically comes as Keygroup XL. If I wanted to go back into the original, I can hit legacy, and then it's basically like it is in MPC2. But obviously, legacy is gonna be off for us because we're using Keygroup XL. Also, you might notice that there's no effects section, and that has been moved. We will cover that later on in the video, so if you're curious about that, check the timestamps below for the effects section. So with this interface on the global, it's pretty much what it looks like with the legacy. Nothing's really changed. I am gonna drop the polyphony down to say 8. Or actually, you know, let's do 6, because I can kind of emulate a normal synthesizer. So we'll do that for now. Obviously, you can adjust that however you want. You can even go pure poly, and it'll just keep on soaking up notes if you want. But with the 6 or 8 voices, you can basically emulate some of that voice stealing that happens with a regular synthesizer, which can make it sound a bit more real in terms of an actual analog synthesizer. Let's go over to samples. We need to select synth oscillator. And I believe nothing's going to happen right now because it's not looped. But if we tap pad loop right here, we have our oscillator. We can also go to layer 2 and do the same thing and detune this down an octave. Also make sure tap the pad. And then we could detune it as well. What's interesting about this is you can target these layers for the modulation matrix. So if you're wondering like, why would you just use the same sample and do that when you have a harmonizer in here now? The reason is because you can have fine control over the actual layers through this method. Now let's go over to filter. So in the filters section, we have 2 filters to use, and they can either be blended together or serial. So one can go into the other. So for instance, if we go serial mode, let's turn the first filter into model 2, one of my favorites. We can bring this down. And then we can also use maybe model 1 for this one. And then let's bring up the key tracking for the first filter. You also have some options with velocity. If you tap velocity, you can do filter cutoff, filter depth, and all that stuff with the velocity. We're going to keep that off for now. And if you want to jump straight into the filter envelope, you can always tap filter envelope right here. You can have access to this type of shaping, and then you can take it off right there. One thing to note, let's say you have a basic envelope like this, and you want it to go down instead of up, because right now, if you move the envelope, it's going to go up. Let's turn key tracking down. So this is one of these things where you might think that you're stuck, don't have any options beyond just going positive. That would be false. So if we take envelope all the way down, we're going to jump ahead a little bit. We're going to go over to the mod matrix, paged way over, and we're going to say source is going to be filter envelope, and the target is going to be cutoff 1. Now we can take the amount, and right now it's going to do the same thing. But if we take that amount, we can go negative. And actually, to make this example better, we need to go back over the filters and bring this guy back up to something like here. Yeah, so let's go back over to the mod matrix. And now we can drop this even further. And let's actually go back over to the filter envelope. And let's make the release even faster. And actually, to make that work, we need to make the amplitude envelope longer. So going back over the amplitude envelope, let's make this release really long. So essentially what I was doing is making it so it's obvious that the filter envelope gets released immediately, but in the mod matrix, it's going negative and then popping back up and then letting the ring out from the amplitude envelope, which by the way, that is really long. Look at this, 30 seconds. So you have a 30-second release time. Very, very long. Let's reduce that. So it's 100 milliseconds. Speaking of envelopes, all of them have a delay, attack, hold, decay, sustain, release. So a lot of control right there. For instance, we can take the attack. Before we do this, let's get rid of our mod matrix effect here. Put that back to 0 for now. We'll come back to that. So we have attack, hold, decay. Now decay will allow us to drop to the sustain level. which if we put this down and with hold, we can hold that peak for a bit before it starts to decay, like so. Let's drop the sustain even lower. You can also loop it, like so. And then you can tempo sync that as well, let's say to a half note. Now let's turn off looped and tempo sync. There's also time scaling, and time scaling affects a percentage of what's happening with these values right here. So if your sustain, or if your attack is 44 milliseconds, and let's say you want it shorter with time scaling, you can drop this down to say 25%, and now it's gonna be 25% of 44 milliseconds, so 11 milliseconds. And as you can hear, everything is going faster now. But what's cool is you can also go up to say 400%. And then on top of that, you have a global control. Global control is great because you might want an envelope, like say the auxiliary envelope, to happen outside of note count or whatever notes are particularly being played. So you can have the whole instrument synced up essentially with global on one of these envelopes you have here, whether it be pitch, auxiliary, filter, or amplitude. So for instance, if I turn this on, let's loop this now. See, it's not re-triggering the envelope. It's just looping it basically because it's global. But when I stop, obviously it'll respond that way. But once a note is held, then I can just like play other notes, but not have it trigger that actual amplitude envelope. So yeah, a lot of creative control right there, a lot of options. On the side panel here, you have some controls that are relevant to the actual envelope. So for instance, amplitude is usually relevant to level of the actual sound. And you can click through and also affect amplitude to velocity. So one thing that synthesizers tend to have is a little bit less velocity depending on the actual synth. So to make something sound a bit more like an actual analog synth, typically you'd bring down the velocity. Or the velocity influence of the sound. And the reason is if you have it full control, it becomes a lot more expressive like a piano, but that doesn't necessarily sound like a synthesizer. So something to keep in mind, if you're doing something that's more acoustic instrument based, then you typically want your amplitude velocity maxed out, or at least relatively full scale. But when it's something like an electronic instrument, they tend to sound better when there's just a little bit of velocity or no velocity affecting the sounds, at least in my opinion, from my experience. And there's other baked in controls like amplitude to attack. So for instance, the velocity can affect the actual attack value and also the panning and things that you can adjust right there. You could also do them in the mod matrix if you want to have a bit more finer control. With the filter, you have direct control over filter 1, filter 2. As you can see, velocity can affect the filter attack, filter cutoff, etc., etc. And with pitch, you have the tuning essentially, and the velocity can affect pitch as well if you desire. But again, a lot of that stuff can be done in the mod matrix, and the mod matrix gives you more control, like for instance, negative values. Moving on from there, let's go to the LFOs. Each note has 2 LFOs with them, and then there's 2 global LFOs. This is really powerful because now you can have things that are independent of each other per note and also have global modulation happening that's across the entire instrument. So for instance, LFO1, what we could do, change the wave, sample and hold. And then we have a rate. We can increase the rate a bit. We have fade in sync, and then also reset, depending on if you're playing the keys, it does reset. We're gonna keep reset off for now. You also have a destinations feature right here, which gives you quick access to pitch, filter 1, filter 2, amplitude, and panning. If we crank panning, it becomes very clear what's happening, right? If we go pitch, it's gonna sound bad. Yeah. If we crank filter 2, One thing that's not happening is any smoothing. So there's no smoothing for sample and hold that I can see here, which is a bit unfortunate. I usually prefer to have some sort of smoothing effect on there. But before we get too far, let's actually go back to the sine wave. Also, let's take off looping with our amplitude envelope. So I'm gonna take off the filter, and we are going to do a little mod matrix type of thing. So if we go over to mod matrix, we're gonna say the source for this modulation is going to be random sample and hold right there. And then the target is gonna be LFO1 speed. Actually, I changed my mind. What we're gonna do is take LFO2. Okay, so LFO2 is going to adjust LFO1 speed. All right, now if we go back to the LFO section and go to LFO2, we're going to change this LFO2 to sample and hold. Now, nothing is going to happen yet because we still have to patch LFO1 into something. And we're going to patch LFO1 into cutoff 2. Also, we're going to take the amount down of LFO2 into LFO1 speed, so it's not absolutely bonkers. So we can hear a nice little mess going on right there, a little sonic mess. And what's happening is the LFO2 sample and hold is independent. So each note has a sample and hold that's happening with that with LFO2, and it's affecting LFO1 speed, which is also affecting the cutoff of filter 2. And so what's happening is basically randomness happening with each note. Because if I go like this, you hear these different values going on. If I play them at the same time, see, different stuff. So those are independent LFOs happening per note. And the mod matrix is making it possible to patch those all together like that. Now, something that you can do via the mod matrix here is you can go into the source that you want to basically control it with. So we could say the mod wheel will be the source for controlling LFO1 into cutoff 2. So if we play this, you hear nothing going on until we start bringing in the mod wheel. And then we rock that back down. We got back to a basic sound. And then we bring that back in. And obviously, we can get crazy from there because we have 32 slots. So we can make that mod wheel do a whole bunch of stuff, or maybe aftertouch, etc., etc. Let's go back to the LFOs just to round things up. So again, you do have delay, so you can make the LFO start a little bit after the key is pressed. You have the rate and rate sync, so if you want to sync it to the tempo, very straightforward stuff. You also have a patch directly into the wheel. So if you do want LFO1 or LFO2, yeah, not the globals though. It's just LFO1 and LFO2 can have a direct patch into the mod wheel, which means that if you don't want to use a mod matrix slot, you could do that if you're always going to control how much LFO happens with the mod wheel. And then the global LFOs are a little bit more basic because you just have rate, rate sync, and then level, because these are designed to be patched elsewhere with the mod matrix. That rounds out the LFOs. Let's go to the utilities. Utilities are interesting. So you do have 2 ramps that you can adjust, which can go all the way up to 30 seconds if you want. So if you want like a 30-second ramp happening, you could do that. It doesn't appear that you can sync this to the tempo, which is a little unfortunate because ramping, every measure or 2 measures is actually pretty useful. Maybe they'll change that in the future. It's possible. As it is right now, you have to go off of milliseconds for your ramps. You also have a note counter size. And what this does is keep track of how many notes are playing, and then you can use that as a modulation source. For instance, let's go over the mod matrix. We're going to say note source, note counter. Just to see, let's patch this into cutoff 1. Let's make it progressively lower. So basically what'll happen is it'll count through the notes as you press them. So I have the note counter size set to 4. So if I go to the mod matrix, here's how I currently have it set up. LFO1 is making cutoff frequency 2 drop. And then note counter is adjusting LFO1 speed, okay? So Note number 1. You can hear it slowly going. If I press it again, going faster. 3 times faster. 4 times faster. Not exactly sure how the calculation is working right there, but note counter is definitely affecting like a multiplier of whatever the target is receiving. So as you can see, note counter is going 44% positive of what the LFO1 speed will receive. And LFO1 speed is negatively affecting cutoff frequency 2 to dip down. So interesting type of variations that we can get right there. So if I press all 4, now what's interesting about this is each one of those LFOs are independent per note. So I'm getting independent modulation from one note counter for each one of those LFOs, if that makes sense. It's really fascinating. So let's actually turn down how much of the multiplier is happening with the note counter. And what we can do is put the mod wheel onto the actual cutoff frequency, LFO1 to negative cutoff 2, and then nothing happens. And then it happens more. And actually, let's increase this so it's even deeper. Maybe increase this a bit. The note counter multiplier. It's pretty cool sound design. Okay, moving on from there. Let's go back to the utilities. So again, we have ramps. Oh, and by the way, if you're wondering what you can do with the ramps, same thing right here. You can go like source, and you can use the ramps. Let's see, where is it? Ramp 1, ramp 2 as a modulation source. I believe you can also use it as a via source right here. So if you want to take the value of an LFO and then slowly ramp up how much it gets applied with one of these ramps, then you could do that via the source options right here, just like how the mod wheel is increasing the LFO1 cutoff frequency, cutoff 2 frequency. Same type of thing, you can just have a ramp automatically do that with this setup. Back to the utilities. Future Tefty here. I got some information incorrect on the voice section right here, so I'm here to fix that. Between the global drift, voice drift, and timbre shift, there is some things that don't exactly make sense in the manual as of right now. And I consulted with Akai and got some details specifically what's happening here. So in the voice section, you basically have 2 more LFOs that are not in the LFO section, they're in the utility section. You have a global drift, which is global for the entire patch, and then you have voice drift, which is per voice. And they basically smooth the random sample and holds that you can control the frequency with the interface. They are not directly patched into anything. So if you do want to use global drift or voice drift or both of them, you do have to go into the mod matrix and patch them specifically. So for instance, we'll go into the source right here. We'll say global drift, and global drift is probably good to patch directly into the pitch. And you're probably going to want to turn it down significantly, like say maybe 1. So let's slowly increase this. Now you can hear that pitch bend right there. So you can turn it down. Creates a bit more of that lo-fi effect. Too much. So you can take this global drift and basically apply it to anything that you'd want modulation for a random sample and hold that is either slow or relatively fast by increasing the hertz. And now let's try that. Definitely a lo-fi effect right there. Let's go back to our page 912 and turn this basically off at the moment. And now let's use voice drift. So voice drift again is per note. So you could use this maybe to target specific things like filter cutoffs to have slightly different variations as they get applied. So maybe let's bring this up to 25 or so. And then let's go back to the utilities, and it's very slow at the moment. So we want to bring this up so we can hear it. So it's too much, obviously. So let's go back to mod matrix, page 912, And I'm going to turn this down to maybe 5. That actually sounds pretty great. We could turn it down even more to be more subtle. Go back to the utilities, maybe drop the hertz so it's a little bit more gentle. Okay, moving on from there, we have timbre shift. Now, timbre shift definitely confused me because the manual said specifically manipulating the sonics of it. And technically what it does is just the samples based on the key group. So as it is right now, this patch will not work with it because there is no additional key groups in the patch. So in order to utilize this timbre shift, we need to make more key groups. So let's do that. Go into number of key groups. We're gonna say 8, okay? Now this is gonna change our patch dramatically. So we're gonna have to go in and do some fixing here. And actually we need to do a bit more preparation for this. So let's go back into sample edit. So we have our original synth oscillator sample. And what we're going to do is start chopping it up. So we have 8 pieces to work with, or 7 pieces, because we have our original single cycle sample that we've been using. And then we're going to grab little sections later on into the sample. So I just chopped it up right there. I still have access to the original single cycle right there, which is in the all mode. So when the sample is in like no chopping mode, it refers to that. But as soon as I start going through the slices, I now have these, slices to work with. So this is great because one sample can provide a bunch of tonal information for this timbre shift. Now we could go a step further and turn all these into like 2 or 3 cycle samples, but that might be a little time consuming at the moment for this example. So we're just going to stick with these samples for the sake of this demonstration. So let's go back into our key group. And what we're going to do is go all the way back to the beginning here. And we need to adjust the keys of how things play. So as it is right now, this is our original that we've been working with. I'm actually going to drop this all the way down to say A1. All right, we'll do B1 for this, which puts it all the way down here. Very low, kind of unusable down there for this patch. Now if we hit C2, so B1, C2, it automatically switches to the next group. And we need to adjust the low key and the high key. So we know it's going to C2, and we're gonna patch these out into octaves, okay? So we're gonna bring this all the way down to B2, and then we're gonna repeat this process for the next sections. Okay, I actually only needed 7 key groups for this octave example. But basically I set up the keys, so if I press through, you'll see it changes the key group as I play through these keys right there. And what we have to do is set the samples now. So if we go to samples, and then let's drop the key group down to 2, you'll see there's nothing there yet. And we need to select our synth oscillator. Then we're gonna go to the slice, and we're gonna change this to 1. We're also going to loop it as well. We're going to do that for each one of these. Now what we can do is go to the next octave, and it'll switch to key group 3 automatically. Or you could just slide through the key groups this way, which could probably be easier for this example. So we'll then go back to here, and then go back to the synth oscillator, and then choose the slice again. Last one was slice 1. This is slice 2. And we're going to pad loop it again. So next key group 4, and repeat. All right, now we can make timbre work. So if we go over to timbre shift, now if we drop timbre, it chooses different samples. We'll do one sample at a time. So basically with timbre shift, it's shifting the sample key groups up and down the keyboard depending on the value of timbre shift. So as you can hear, you can get a lot of different texture and tones from just basically one sample being stretched across the keyboard into all these different key groups. There is a problem though that I see with this at the moment, and the big issue for me is that I don't see any way to actually modulate something like this. So if you go target, which would be the timbre shift, there is no timbre shift target that I can tell. Yeah, Nothing on there. And maybe this is something that they can add in the future, but as it stands, in order to use this, you'd either have to map a Q link directly to this knob or go directly into the utilities knob to adjust it every time you want to do some sort of shifting with the timbre shift, which is a bit of a shame. Because this would have been really cool to be able to have like a modulation thing or like a ramp that would constantly go through different timbres. And as you can hear, it doesn't change it mid-sample. So this won't do anything, but as the note is pressed, it changes the key group. Which is interesting, right? So that concludes the voice section right here. Again, this was recorded in the future because I wanted to make some corrections and go deeper into this. So the rest of the video that has like Portamento, pitch bend, Keygroup stacks, and all that stuff is not going to have these key groups, except for the effects section down the road. Just wanted to clarify that for you guys. So we do have Portamento, and the usual suspects here. We can adjust the Portamento time, we can make it legato, we can make it mono retrigger, and we can also quantize it as well. This is all pretty straightforward stuff for sound design, so if you've done any kind of Portamento things, turn off the quantize, and you won't hear the stepping. Yeah, anyway, so if you're interested in some Portamento abilities, got some more features right there. Then you have the pitch bending, which can go all the way up to an octave and all the way down to an octave like so. Whoops. Now, moving on to the Keygroup Stack feature. This is very powerful and really awesome. Definitely a feature that can add a lot of character and adjustments to your samples. So obviously it's off right now with the none, but if I put on unison, you're not going to hear any changes yet because we got to put voices up. So we'll say 5 voices. We'll detune them a bit. Immediate difference right there, right? A lot of phasing, canceling that's happening. If we put up the stereo spread, actually let's max it out. Delicious. We have linear, which will change the detuning calculation. Parabolic. Then you have random as well. Yeah. Let's turn down the stereo spread. And let's go to the mod matrix because we're going to adjust the detune value here. So we're going to keep what we got going on right here. We'll go to the second page. And the source is going to be the mod wheel, okay? And then the target, unison detune. That's what we want. So now that we have that feature, let's actually bring this detune down. As we rock up the mod wheel, can really bust it. This would be great with some reverb and delay right now. Let's actually turn the voices down. Let's just say like 2 voices. So that's clearly too much, right? Let's just go back in the mod matrix and say the amount. Let's rock this down to say 26. So that's unison. There's also Harmonizer as well, which goes a bit further, but it's different. So if you look at this, you have 2 pages to go into and you have 4 notes. So with the 4 notes, you can adjust the shift, the detune, the volume, and the panning. And then in the second page, key scale, delay, and sync. So you can delay when those notes come in with this Harmonizer. So technically you could do some of this inside the actual sample page layer type of stuff, but this offers just a really quick way to make it happen across all the sample layers that are in your patch at the moment. So I took off all the notes. Right now you can only hear the samples that are in the actual patch right now. If we go 100% of the mix, it's only hearing the harmonizer stuff. So let's bring this down. We'll turn on note 1. So you hear that higher harmonic. You can even go 2 octaves up. Getting a little craziness right here. So let's bring the mix all the way down. So it's off basically in terms of what you're hearing. Let's go back to the mod matrix and let's do the same thing. Let's make another mod wheel patch here. Mod wheel. And then for this, go down to the harmonizer mix. So you have some different options right there. I personally find the unison better. Because you got that stereo spread that's happening, which is kind of what I want to happen with like a voice generator essentially. So that's the stack feature in Keygroup XL. Now we're on to the mod matrix, and we've pretty much been talking about the mod matrix this whole time. There's a little bit of deeper stuff, and it has to do with the shaper. So you have a second source that you get to multiply with whatever your original source is. So that's pretty straightforward. You know, if you want, say, your mod wheel to increase the LFO amount, you patch it like that. So you go mod wheel into LFO source, and that kind of gives you that ability to increase the LFO amount. But you also have something called the shaper. And the shaper has more options from linear, which is basically just a straight value increasing, to square, cubic, inverse, you know, square root, all the stuff, all the way to quantize. And the quantize is, as you'd expect, it starts stepping it as it gets increased, which I'm not sure if we can hear it on this. A little difficult to hear with this example, but the idea is basically that you're adjusting the way that curve happens. Instead of a straight diagonal line that happens on the graph, you can adjust it with the shaper to have some more character. How much of a difference that's gonna make for your patch completely depends on the source and the destination, whether or not you're gonna be able to pick up on some of those things. So I said it before, I'll say it again, this mod matrix makes it very powerful to do a lot of stuff with these key groups. There is some limits though, that is a little disappointing. One of those limits is the fact that there is no effects. There's no delay, reverb type of basic things. So you can't use any of your LFOs or global LFOs or envelopes as mod sources for effects. So if you wanted to be able to ramp up like reverb or do some customization to a reverb, depending on maybe the note size or something like that, you're not going to be able to do that with the current version of Keygroup XL. Maybe that's going to change in the future. Don't know. Maybe they'll have it to where you can have your targets show up whatever effects you have loaded to the actual key group. Possibly. Or this is me suggesting to the Akai developers that may or may not be watching this, hey, that'd be really nice to have an option right there to make this even more powerful, because it's amazing what we have right now. Great start, but it would be great to go just a bit further and be able to affect other effects, or have at least the option for delay, reverb baked into certain things and have modulations affect those. So again, you have 32 patch points, so a lot of flexibility if you do want to build some really like tweaked out custom patches that are highly complex, because you have a lot of source options here, good amounts, and then the destinations also quite a bit, from the layers, you know, all the way up to 8 layers to various envelope shaping customizations. Yeah, really good stuff. Interestingly, sample start is only patch wide. It's not per layer. Not sure why they did that. I kind of feel like each layer should have its own sample start, but it doesn't. There's also no sample end, unfortunately. To round things out, there is a randomize page, and the randomize is pretty straightforward. You can randomize all the layers, attack, decay, cutoff, cutoff 2, and the resonance and all that, which is nice. And then you also have access to pitch, level, pan, and offset per layer, like so, and an overall amount, which I don't know if you can modulate that, I wonder. Nope, you cannot. So another thing that's not in destinations for the mod matrix. Would be interesting to bring that up with a mod wheel, technically. So the effects, where are they with Keygroup XL? Because in the legacy mode, you can have each key group have a set of effects that are different from each other. Can you do that in Keygroup XL? Yes, you can. So you got to go to menu, and then you go to pad mixer. Not exactly intuitive, right? But pad mixer is kind of a holdover from how the drum groups are applied. But as you can see, all of the key groups are now here in this section. So naturally, if you want to apply some effects to Keygroup 4, and by the way, if you play this, you'll see the various groups popping up. So Keygroup 4, let's say you want to throw some reverb, or let's just throw Air Delay Pro in there. Maybe you want this lower octave to have more of a vintage effect to it, so I will throw a filter on there. Air Vintage filter. Maybe this octave, we want like a long, expansive reverb. We're gonna crank up the time, room size big, drop the mix. So now, a lot of possibilities with this, right? You also have sends. So if you did want to have some effects that were completely send based and get access to them with the key groups, totally possible right here. And obviously you got pan and volume and the regular volume right here. And then you can also route the IO as well. So if you did not want everything going just to the track, if you wanted to go to specific submixes or specific outs in your audio interface, you could do that with this. So all these sections could be processed separately if you wanted to go that deep with your key group. But again, if you want to get to this section, you got to go to the menu and then pad mixer, assuming that you're on the key group in here. Because if you go to, say, plugin, menu, pad mixer, it's not going to be there. Just make sure you're on the right track, like key group. You go menu and then find the pad mixer because it might actually be rearranged differently on here. And then you're good to go. But yeah, I think that's the tour of Keygroup XL. Again, very powerful tool. Great that it's in MPC now. It is only MPC3, so if you do make patches with MPC3, you're not going to be able to load them up into your computer with MPC2 as of yet. I'm sure that's going to change at some point, but right now in January 2025, that is not the case. We do not have a PC version or Windows or Mac version of the MPC3 software yet. And there's a lot of features that are still technically missing in MPC3 firmware hardware, like time signatures. So if you're thinking about that type of stuff, if you want to get your hands on Keygroup XL, but you're a little apprehensive about upgrading just yet for MPC3, you might want to wait a bit. Just saying. Because yes, powerful, love it, very excited about this stuff, but you do lose out on a lot of things that currently are like baked into MPC2 that work, like integration into the PC version. So if you make a project on MPC3, you cannot bring that MPC3 project over to MPC2 software on the computer, or even an MPC2 software previous version for the hardware. You're stuck on MPC3 if you start making projects like that. So something to consider. If you enjoyed this content, a like and subscribe goes a long way. And if you want to pick up any gear, if you use my affiliate links below, then it directly supports the channel, which allows me to purchase more things for this channel. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time for another one. Peace.